Welcome to this special edition of The Agenda. I've just moderated a live event looking at some of the key leadership decisions facing organizations as we enter another dark winter in the COVID pandemic. And we were all blown away by the keynote speaker we're about to hear from. My guest today believes that there must be a better way for leaders to lead and for people to work together. And for the last 15 years, he's been on a quest to help leaders and their teams find that better way. He's been described as the first leadership guru for the digital generation. Emmanuel Gobillot has written no less than 9 best-selling books. He runs his own consultancy firm, and he's an acclaimed public speaker. So, big warm welcome. Emmanuel, great to have you with us.
Thank you for inviting me.
On the agenda. So let's start off by a better way. What does that mean? What do you mean by it?
You know, I guess I started this for the same reason an oyster makes a pearl, out of sheer irritation. You know, I was employed in a business, finding myself constantly thinking, really? Is that really how we treat people, be they customers or employees? Do we really have to do this? You know, with all that enthusiasm that young people have for changing things. And one of the things I very early on thought is, well, there has to be a better way. And one of the deal I made with myself was, whatever happens, I'm just not going to let that go. I don't want to become the person who thinks, if we can get away with that, we'll be okay. So that was kind of the mission, you know. And as I progressed, I thought, I've been really good at raising the issue of thinking, really? But actually, I can't be the one bringing the answer. The answer has to be a collective answer. So the phrase I've always used is, there has to be a better way, and together we can find it.
So what are the ingredients of the better way?
I think the better way is one where everybody comes away from it thinking, I'm okay. I haven't lost my humanity. I haven't lost anything. I haven't compromised. I haven't, you know, we've built something together. I think the problem is, and I think that's von Strompenaar, the Dutch thinker, good friend. Fons always says, you know, the difficulty we have is we always try to make a choice between 2 positions. And as a result, we kind of end up somewhere in the middle. And actually, wouldn't it be better to try to combine those opposites and find something different, find some innovation?
I think
it is. I think it is, if we all put our point of view together.
Give me an example.
So I tell you, look, I'm going to make it. So Catherine and I, my wife and I, we got married and decided to go on honeymoon like people do. So we've never been to Japan. I've been pretty much all over the world for my job, but we've never been to Japan. Neither of us had been to Japan. So we thought, okay, well, let's go somewhere we've never been. It's the honeymoon, you know, hopefully there'll be only one, you know, it's kind of, you want to make it special. So we thought Japan. And then we started to think, well, but I don't know, what about if it doesn't work out? Because we've never been, we don't know. How about if it's a flop, if we don't enjoy Japan? Let's go to New York now. We met in New York, we got engaged in it, we love New York. Okay, so we know 100% we're going to stay at the same place, we're going to love every minute of it. But it's boring, because we've been before. So now, if you're an executive, New York, Japan, you probably end up in Istanbul, right? Because it's kind of the middle.
It's not a bad choice.
Right? Not a bad place, but it doesn't fulfill anything. It's just the ultimate compromise. So now the interesting point in business is, how do you break that line and don't make it a straight line, but think, how do I get to Japan and New York? How do I work that out? Now, I'll tell you what we did, okay? So we went to New York on the Queen Mary. We've never been on a boat, so that's a new experience. We can enjoy Japanese food if we want to on the boat, because you can have pretty much whatever you want. It's a brand new experience for both of us, but we knew that at the end of those 7 days, we were in New York anyway. So if everything got wrong, if we were seasick because we'd never been on a boat, we would have been okay. So what we tried to do is to think, okay, what can we do which fulfills both the need of being new, something completely different that we've never done, and the need of being guaranteed enjoyment? I'm not saying this is the perfect answer, but it's a different way of thinking than thinking, okay, how do I get a bit of both and end up nowhere?
And do you think that way of thinking, where you're trying to include both points of view or many points of view in decision making, in leadership, is something that these times need, that business leaders could do with more of that thinking right now?
I think yes, just because we just don't have the answer. There is no answer. You know, the future is uncertain. Well, that's the future. It has always been that way. And to think that me, with my point of view, with my experience, actually I have the right answer is unlikely. You know, there are generational differences, there are gender differences, there's all sorts of things going on in the world which I have no experience of. So at some stage, you're going to have to get more point of view. Now, of course, not everything is a dilemma. You know, as a leader, you have to make a choice. Sometimes you have to make a decision. Sometimes you have to think, well, look, this is not optimal, but this is what we're going to go with, and you have to learn to live with the outcome. But starting a position by saying, I know I'm right, I think is a sure, you know, it has to lead you to failure, because there is something somewhere which you won't have taken into account. So the more you can see, the more point of views you can bring in, the more you can deal with those dilemmas in a different way, the more likely you are to succeed.
Leaders are nothing if they don't take their teams and their whole organisation with them.
Yeah.
They can very well set targets and goals and strategies, but they could be whistling in the wind if they don't take the team with them.
Yeah.
What do you think is missing right now in terms of bringing organisations together? We are, after all, still in the thick of the pandemic in many parts of the world.
Yeah. If you think about, you know, what is the job of a leader? At what levels do leaders? So leaders do 3 jobs. They have to work in the business. There's some stuff that leaders do. Yeah, they have to do themselves personally, deliver, whatever. Then they have a job which is on the business. Are we working efficiently? Do we have the right resources? Do we have the right capability? Are we doing things in the right way? And so on and so forth. Then there's a bit which is out of the business. What's coming up? What was the next thing that I haven't even thought about? Now, I think what we're missing is the right ratio of those 3 activities. Now, the problem is, the more uncertain things become, the more the pandemic has struck us, the more we wanted results, the more we need immediacy, the more we go back in the business. And leaders, by and large, are comfortable in the business because that's where they were born. You know, leaders are made in the business. Now, what we find through our research is that actually value is created on the business. So, you know, what we need is CEOs to spend, 20% of their time in the business, 40% of their time 50% of their time on the business, 10-20% out of the business. Now, that ratio, if it gets out of kilter, if you start to spend too much time in the business, then what we lose is we lose that richness of ideas, that creativity, all the stuff that we need in order to get through. Actually, the pandemic, has brought some amazing stuff. I've seen in the public sector, public-private sector working together at the start of the pandemic to try to sort things out, boundaries breaking left, right, and centre, and that created a richness which, just brought new ideas, brought creativity. So I think if we start to think about on the business, what does that look like? How can we do things better rather than, okay, I need to do this, that, and the other. But it's tough. It is tough because, the more uncertain things are, the more the environment is pushing you back. Say, come on, give me an answer. There's nothing worse than having a boss. I don't know if but you've got a boss who's been on a coaching course or something, and you go and see them and say, boss, I'm stuck. What should I do? And because they've been on the course, they go, well, what do you think you should do? And you go, no, I just want you to tell me. And so,
but hang on a second, I'm going to interrupt you there because I've heard you speaking, giving one of your acclaimed public addresses, and one of the key things you talk about is co-create with me. So you're talking about the need to empower your teams and help them to deliver on these goals and not giving them all the solutions, right? It's the opposite of what you just said. So how do you do that? How do you empower your teams to feel that they can do it without censure, without the organisation coming on their backs, etc.?
Yeah. So I think that, so what I'm talking about when I talk about this thing is, how do I make you stronger and more capable? Now, if you know that I'm capable, that I've been working hard, that I'm devoted, and I come to you with a question, the likelihood is I've thought about it quite a bit already, and I'm unlikely to have the answer. So if you want to make me stronger and more capable, then give me the answer. So it's not a one-size-fits-all. So I think the act of co-creation is really one where we sit down and think, okay, what do I need to inject here? What is it? I'm constantly thinking about what is it that I need to do in order to make you stronger and more capable. Now, the problem with leaders is we tend to see organizations as hierarchies with one person at the top. And that person's voice tends to be quite loud and resonate. But actually that person's influence is tiny. If you think of organization as an ice cream cone, the action is at the top. The thousands and thousands of people who interact every day with thousands and thousands of customers or whatever it might be. Now that voice of the CEO at the bottom is actually quite a small voice. So, once it resonates, its impact is relatively small. So the thing for the CEO is to say, okay, how do I make the 10, 14 people alongside me stronger and more capable so they can make the 10, 15 people alongside them stronger and more capable, and so on and so forth. So co-creation really starts with a different way of working at the very top, which then automatically starts to filter through the organization.
Something that's been on my mind a lot at the moment, as we are entering into possibly another deep, dark winter of lockdowns because of the COVID pandemic, is what is the role of business leaders in nudging their staff, their organizations along to do the civically responsible thing, which is to get vaccinated? It's hugely polarizing. Do you think the business leaders have a role in this?
I think it is hugely polarizing, and it's not an easy one to answer. So like most things, I'm going to say, well, yes and no. Yes, they have a role. I think, look, duty of any employer of any kind is to keep people safe. And there are something on which, we talked about dilemma earlier. Health and safety is not a dilemma. It's not one of those where you think, well, it's either there or not. So I think there's a duty of care. Now, a duty of care doesn't have to translate into a mandate for vaccination. There might be some more creative ways in which you can do it. But there also comes a point where you have to think about, why is it that people don't want to get vaccinated? Why is it? And there's a lot of noise out there, and there's a lot of alternative facts, misinformation, all sorts of things that I think as a leader, you'd be remiss if you didn't deal with some of that, because people don't just become a different person where they come to work. So they bring all of that fear and whatever it might be to work. So I think there's a duty for employers not to ignore it. I think there's a duty of care.
And what about the duty for empathy? Because at the moment it's to do with the vaccinations, but it might be other issues which are equally polarizing, gender issues, for instance. Some people are for it and some people think it's nonsense. So you have these divisions within your workforce. As a leader, what is your role in terms of empathizing with people you don't agree with, possibly?
No, so I think, I have a different take on empathy. I think empathy is overrated. Not as a bad thing. What do I mean by that? I think the problem with empathy is an intellectual exercise. Okay, it's about me understanding how you feel. Now that can be to either me dismissing it, it can be leading to me abusing that because I understand how you feel, therefore I might be able to manipulate it. But it certainly doesn't construct anything positive. So I prefer to talk about compassion. And compassion for me is kind of active empathy that says, look, I really get where you're coming from, and I'm happy to help you do something with that. Not, I get where you're coming from, you're wrong, or I get where you're coming from. Now, you may well be wrong, but there's, me telling you you're wrong is not going to help anybody to achieve anything. So the act of compassion is one to say, okay, let's deal with what's on the table together, not me influencing you, not me trying to have one over you, not me trying to ignore you, but me trying to think, okay, how do we move? This is me, this is, so talk about the vaccine thing. Okay, so if I believe that vaccination is the right thing to do, it's the right thing for me, it's the right thing for you, it's the right thing for everybody, you believe the exact opposite, what do we do? What do we do?
Tell me.
Well, I think we talk about it. Why do you believe that? Is that right? Where do you get your stuff from? How are we going to move forward? Now, again...
So a lot of conversations then have to take place in large organizations.
In large organizations, which is why we need to go back to actually what's your sphere of matter. Now, you can decide to make the whole thing simpler by saying, well, you can't work here unless you're vaccinated, or you can't come into the office. So you're going to have a policy. But we back to, there is a fundamental issue for any business which is more than 14 people, which is at some stage you're going to get into intimacy, let's have those conversations to get somewhere. Efficiency, how do I make it happen at scale? We have a lot more technology now, which can help us to have conversations at scale. We have different ways of working. So there's a big job to do. But what's the alternative?
So what do you think are the key qualities that leaders need during these uncertain times, these very polarizing times? Could you boil it down for me?
Yeah, I guess listen and talk. And I separate the two, because I think both of them have a different role to play. Now, one of the things we saw at the beginning of the pandemic, which is going to cause great difficulties for most leaders, is leaders had a tendency to over-communicate in a good way. So people, CEOs would do little videos on their way back home, this is what I've done today, come on, let's all be cool, whatever. And there was a lot of communication, over-communication all the time, to try to reassure people, to try to get them on side. Now I'm starting to see them pulling back a bit, saying, oh, okay, we've done that for 2 years now, we need to move to something else. And I think that's going to create difficulties, because people are saying, this is quite cool. This other communication stuff is quite useful and it's engaging. And actually I'm seeing more, I'm learning more about the organization. So I think there's a communication role. There's something about speaking more, broadcasting messages, being able to bring some narratives into the organization. The second quality is one of listening. It's one of saying, actually, what is going on? And not listening. I mean, most leaders don't listen. They reload, so they stay quiet.
Say that, what do you mean?
What I mean is they stay quiet because they're just thinking about the next thing they're going to say, all right? Not because they're listening to what you're saying. They're just thinking, okay, where am I going next? So they're kind of reloading, Now, here's the issue. If I listen to understand rather than listen to argue or listen to be right, then we get into a conversation. And that act of listening is really hard. Again, hard.
Listen to understand. Yeah. That's a very powerful point, Emmanuel.
Not listen to speak, and that's
or
that's
to
why I separate the two,
you.
or to convince you, or to try to,
very,
constantly
very
thinking
interesting
ahead.
point. Okay, so I'm going to flip it around. What do you think that people need, organizations need from their leaders at this point?
I think they need accuracy. So, it is easy to be pushed into a situation where you have to say just because people are fearful. What do we want as followers? So as followers, we want our leaders to be like us, but kind of better. If you think about it, you kind of want them to be like us, but you want to think of them a bit better than you think of yourself, that you think, oh, they've got something. And I think from my point of view, that's kind of what we want. We want somebody who is accurate. So we're pushing people to give us answers they don't have. So a strong leader would be somebody who says, okay, this is the truth. And if the truth is I don't know, then you have to find a way of saying I don't know, and that's how we're going to find out.
As you were speaking just now, I was thinking to myself, we want our leaders to be like us, but better. And I thought, no, it depends on which country you're in. It's very polarized culturally. So I want to ask you a final question about what it's like to be a public speaker, traveling the world, engaging with people from different parts of the world, different cultures. How much do you have to modify what you're saying to connect?
A lot, I think. So there's two parts to the answer. Now, most business is still done with American models that were designed in the 60s and 70s, 50s, 60s, 70s, before there was anything technological or whatever else. And we still bang the same models, and it's still the same. So there is a global language of business just because everybody is being influenced by the same writing, the same business, the same. So you've got to kind of know that language. My problem is that language doesn't really resonate with me. And I've always thought if you want to be understood, then you have to speak in the language of your audience. So that requires a lot of adaptation. It also needs you to be careful that in trying to adapt, you also don't lose who you are. So I mean, sometimes I go to. I try to avoid countries that give me very long contracts saying you can't say this, you can't say this, you can't say that, because I know that that's like a red rag to a bull. There are the first things I'm going to say when I step on stage. So because I want to come back, I always avoid those countries. So I think you have to adapt culturally, but if you have a message, you can't adapt to the point that your message is diluted. And so sometimes audiences will get it, and it's my skill to make sure that they get it. But I won't change the message just in order to please the audience. I'll try to make sure it resonates with them.
So our podcast series is all about leaders on leadership.
Yeah.
Can I ask you to do a very difficult thing, which is to try and bring to a point what our conversation has been about. What do you want our listeners to take away from this?
Well, I'm always asked, what's the one thing? And I mean, I remember having that discussion with my publisher when my first book came out. She said, describe the book in one sentence. And I thought, what's the point of writing a book? If you can do it in one sentence, might as well just send a tweet or something. So I always struggle with what's the one point. But, I think there is the closest I ever got in my practice to a silver bullet to leadership, to this thing that goes to the core, is this question. If you can answer by the affirmative the question of, have I made them feel stronger and more capable? And if the answer is yes, then I think people will follow you, because they will trust you, because they will see something in you. And I think, as a leader, if you can constantly have that, not have I made them feel, but do they feel stronger and more capable after that small encounter that we've had, after that 2-minute conversation in the lift, after that 3-hour meeting? Not happy, maybe they're challenged or whatever, but do they feel stronger as a result? And I think it's our duty as leaders to make them feel stronger, but it's also the reward that if we make people feel stronger, they will give us everything they've got.
Now I understand why you're such a successful motivational speaker, Emmanuel. It's been great to have you with us on the agenda. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much.